This is me finishing my last race, one that I didn't even want to do. Let's see what happened. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Monday Primetime Racing. This is the stage 2 of the Z Racing Flat is Fast series, and today we are doing the Beach Island loop, 2 laps, and as I hinted in the intro, I didn't actually want to enter this race. And the reason for that is the day before this I did a 3 hour and 15 minute long endurance ride, and honestly my legs were toast at this point. However, I wanted to maintain some sort of continuity in my racing, so I entered this race as a part of the 450 to 570 racing score group, and I actually didn't have much expectations in terms of results. But I told myself that at least I would try to improve my positioning within the group, because let's be honest, oftentimes in these flat races your success or failure depends on your efficiency and your ability to conserve energy during these efforts. Beach Island Loop definitely isn't the most difficult route on Zwift, not by any stretch of imagination. But that doesn't mean that racing on this route is easy. It's actually quite the opposite. Since it is so flat and so easy, riders have the ability to go very hard right from the start, instead of saving energy for the climbs. So while there aren't that many spikes in terms of power needed, the overall effort level is actually higher and there is less opportunities to recover. Because of that, a flat race like this can basically end up only in one of two scenarios, either a bunch sprint or a breakaway. And there aren't actually that many places where the breakaway can happen, and now we are actually entering the first one. This little uphill section right here is called Dirty Sorpresa, and I would even hesitate to call it a climb, but it is still a segment in which you have to really put a good watts to stay with the front group. And as you can see right here, there are guys pushing 6 and even more watts per kilo. I didn't expect anything major to happen in the first lap here, but this is definitely a spot where if anything happened during this race, it would be probably here. And even during this first lap you can see that the group is really splitting, and despite putting quite good watts, I was sort of afraid that I might be actually dropped from the front. For a moment or two it actually looked like a breakaway might form in the front, so I decided to pop my aero boost, we are actually quite close to another power up, and push for a little more to stay with the front. In this race you actually get the power up each time you cross the banner, and you can get either aero boost or a draft power up for a total of 4 power ups in this race. In my opinion, the optimal would be to get draft boost for the first 3 and aero boost for the finishing sprint. As usual, I got the exact opposite, so I got aero for the first 3 and draft for the end. At this point the breakaway attempt has been caught, so let's speed this up a little bit again. Like I said, there aren't that many spots on this course where breakaway can happen, and I would actually say there are only 3, one of which would be actually incredibly difficult to execute. But let's take a look at them in more detail. I would say the first opportunity for breakaway is the first uphill beyond the finish banner. We cannot call it a climb really, but it is still an uphill segment in which you have to put in some power. And if there was a strong guy that would feel particularly well, they could make an early attack in the lap 2. I wouldn't assume there would be an attack in lap 1, as pretty much everyone is still fresh. But early in lap 2 is definitely a possibility. Like I said though, it would be very difficult to execute, because after you made that breakaway you would need to hold it against a very well populated peloton that is chasing you, so if you made a move like that, the whole lap 2 would be probably a huge sufferfest for you. The second place for possible attack is the one we actually showed, is the Dirty Sorpresa. It is a very small climb, it's basically an uphill dirt road, but people are still pushing 6 watts per kilo, and if you really put down the power you could actually drop the group behind you, or at least majority of the riders, and continue in way smaller group if not alone. And the third possible place for attack is actually very close to where we are now. It's the exit from the tunnels when there is the uphill ramp, and it is followed by subsequent uphill segments when you actually leave the tunnels. So that is more like an opportunity for a finishing attack, but if someone wanted to make the move at the end of lap 1, there would be that possibility. As my legs in this race were basically in a survival mode, I didn't plan any of such attacks, but I really tried to practice my positioning in the group. Usually I'm drafting behind the group, but I find that it is very easy to get dropped, and if you are, you really need to put a lot of power to return to the group. On the other hand, if you stay in the middle of the group or the front third, it is way harder to get dropped actually, and you can save way more energy. Here we entered the second lap and I was on a lookout for a breakaway attempt on this little uphill segment, but nothing like that actually happened and the peloton stayed pretty compact, which made me pretty content. At this point I was pretty certain it would come down to either Dirty Sorpresa attack and breakaway or a bunch sprint. I knew there was the possibility that someone would make the attack on the exit from the underwater tunnels, but I was actually pretty confident that I would be actually able to stay with the group until the sprint if that happened. Until this point I was averaging about 3.2 watts per kilo, and despite my legs were actually pretty angry at me, I was able to do so with pretty decent heart rate of about 160 BPM, which for me isn't that much. However, there was still 10 kilometers to go. Although this looks like a very easy route, and it is a very easy route, doing 2 laps of it means that you are actually racing for about 35 minutes, which is actually more than average in these Z-Racing races. At this point we are entering the last easy part of this race. It's the flat section before the Italian villas, and I really expected hell to break loose on the Dirty Sorpresa. And this was actually a pretty important part of the race for me, because I knew that if I survived the Dirty Sorpresa in the front group, I could actually fight for the podium in the finishing sprint. So I was really determined to not let front go, but then again, I'm often determined like that and then I'm dropped anyway. And as expected, the power kicked up over 5, 6, even 7 watts per kilo for some riders, and the front was really trying to get away. It however felt like something I can hold, so I was determined to really push through the pain, and when reaching the top I had the aero power up, which wasn't perfect but was better than nothing, so I planned to use it to really catch any riders that might have dropped me by that point. And I actually finished the climb pretty at the front, so that was a really positive surprise for me, and I didn't even need to chase someone. I could drop back to comfortable pace and continue riding with the group. And the group actually stayed pretty large at this point. Some people were dropped on the Dirty Sorpresa, but there was still like 70 riders in the front. So at this point it was pretty clear it would be either the finishing attack on the ramp or a bunch sprint. And as you can see, for my last power up I received the draft boost, which isn't perfect for the finishing sprint, but at least it's better than Ghost, so I decided I would either use it for the finishing sprint if there was a group effort, or if there was an attack on the ramp from the underwater tunnels, I would use this power up to stay with the group. So here we are entering the last 5k of the race, and I'm still maintaining 160 BPM-ish, which is something that I like by this point of the race. However, it was not my breathing that was the problem, it was really my legs. They were really tired from the previous day's workout, and by this point they were really screaming at me. Mainly the front of my thighs were burning. And to be completely honest, I didn't believe I would have my usual sprint at the end of this race, but that doesn't mean I would give up easily. There was still 3k to go and the group was pretty compact, so there was still chance. However, then something happened, and it was actually way before I expected it. And pretty soon you will be able to see it on the minimap. There were actually few guys who decided to go right here. And what this attack did was it triggered the racing mode for this whole group. You can see it on the power chart. It immediately went into red, and it was pretty clear that it would be a sufferfest until the finish line. For a little moment the group actually rejoined here, but you can actually clearly see that once the ramp kicked up, so did the numbers of all riders, and we were now deep into the racing mode. I was determined to revive this, so I pushed up the power deep into the red. I knew that it might cost me the finishing sprint, but I thought it would be better to try for the podium instead of, being able to sprint but be dropped from the front. But you can clearly see how fast the front was going. I am pushing way over 4 watts per kilo, and the front is actually leaving pretty quickly. So at this point I knew that it was either using the power up or I'm getting dropped, especially since the ramp isn't the final uphill section of this course. You can see that this is another false flat. It's about 2% up, nothing major, but it is absolutely enough to push you to your limit at this point of this race. So I popped the drafting boost and really chased the group, which looked like might leave me anyway, but with some clever use of Zwift play steering, I managed to catch the group back again. And now everyone is all in, 500 meters to go. I waited for about my usual sprinting spot, about 250 meters from the finish line, and I tried to go for it. However, quickly after raising from my saddle, I knew I couldn't do my usual numbers, so I tried to push the number seated, and I actually didn't do bad. If I was fresh, this might be a podium finish, but this was a 6th place and that made me happy as well.